Hi, it's Gordon again. I'm just reading from my book, The End is Nigh Again, but this time we really mean it. I'm continuing on the evening meal we had in which we discussed blood with my father when we were kiddies. Okay, and so, as I watched Dad waiting expectantly for my reply to what was, in his mind, a one-answer question, I thought of the time when God was in full reign of the world in those early days. From what I'd read in the Bible accounts, life under God's direct administration wasn't much to write home about. It seemed that as soon as anything went wrong, his answer was just to wipe us all out in a fit of self-righteous indignation. No, the fact was that I wanted life now. I had it, I owned it, and it was mine. It was, in truth, the only real thing that I had amidst the topsy-turvy world I belonged to. I couldn't have said that to Dad for fear of having a good walloping. But that's how I felt, and from the look on the faces of Veronica and Angus, they were pretty much in agreement too. "Well, I suppose so," I said finally with piss-poor enthusiasm. "That's a good lad, Douglas," Dad said, happy to hear the correct answer even though it had come through gritted teeth. "Now let's go and get the Tuesday night book study prepared," he said, suddenly shattering us from our own private thoughts of death, blood, and plans to run away forever. And so as we left the table and went to study another chapter from another boring book based on another mad passage from the Bible, during the whole hour that followed, I paid little attention to what we were studying and could only focus on my overwhelming sense of sadness. From that day on, I made a personal vow to take extra special care whilst crossing roads. I stopped playing with knives, I avoided riding on my bike on rough ground, and desisted from wall hopping or any other potentially bloodletting activity. I was determined not to have to sacrifice my then life based on the feeble and ephemeral possibility of something better in the future. It was that pragmatic outlook on life that often had me swinging between the one biscuit option when dealing with people I mistrusted, and the two biscuit option when I met someone who deserved my confidence. The witnesses, however, believe wholeheartedly that faith should be based on the two biscuit principle. Their biscuits, however, are like the thin, rich tea type that collapse disappointingly after one quick dunk into the steaming cup of truth. In terms of how people think of the witnesses, the blood issue is probably the most well-known and infamous part of their belief structure. Over the last century, it has had more impact on the general public than any of their other anti-world beliefs. For them, blood is sacred to God, and they can neither eat it nor have it transfused into the veins. Their refusal to take blood is based on a number of scriptures, mostly from the Old Testament, which encourage God's followers to abstain from blood. It seems that the blood is God's favourite bit of the living creature, and he wants it all to himself. What's more, the witness view the acceptance of a transfusion as tantamount to feeding from the blood, or in other words, cannibalism. And so for all those reasons, it's totally unacceptable. It's interesting to note, however, that despite their horror at what they see as the flippant use and abuse of blood, their God, particularly that of the Old Testament, wasn't averse to spilling the odd gallon or two himself. In fact, in the first few books of the Bible, the earth was awash with blood of the guilty and of the innocent, and with a worrying lack of distinction thereof. One assumes that God just hadn't been able to get over the embarrassment of having made such a cock-up at the beginning, and after ruminating over the disgraceful lack of respect that had been shown to him by, well, everyone, he was determined to address the balance. By the time Exodus was written, only the second book of the Bible, mark you, God had already destroyed everyone and everything on the earth. With the cunning use of a global flood, he had killed every living creature but for an ark filled with a bunch of pick-and-mix survivors made up of two of every kind of animal and Noah's small family. Quite what all the other animals had done to displease God isn't known. perhaps they'd eaten too much vegetation or had pooed with impunity in the sacred places. Most of us would agree that, on the whole, animals act out of instinct rather than badness, and so it seems unlikely that they'd been misbehaving enough to warrant mass death by drowning. I say on the whole, as I've had the displeasure of watching chimpanzees play with themselves in Edinburgh Zoo, and to be frank, some of the things that they were doing with their bits and pieces for their own amusement were deserved of at least 2 buckets of cold water. However, drowning them forever does seem to be a bit of an overreaction. Personally, I would have been okay with just knowing that they had washed their hands afterwards. God, so it seems, doesn't have quite the same tolerance. So there you are. A little bit about blood. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll post some more. See you later.